has stabilized a little. So we'll get started. I appreciate that we're doing this in everybody's lunch hour as well. So welcome. I am Mel Keep. I'm an associate professor in the Sydney School of Health Sciences. It is a privilege to be chairing this Lost in Translation webinar on behalf of the Digital Health Informatics ECR committee. So as we start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of all the lands that we are calling from today. I'm on the lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present, and extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the room. I invite you to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands that you're calling from via the chat as well. I think acknowledgements of country are often said at the start of events such as these, and there's always a risk of them being the thing that you tick off at the start of a webinar or a meeting. But I think in the digital health space, it's particularly important to remember that change and navigating different cultures in the sort of broader sense of the word is something that has happened in our lands, on our lands for thousands of years, that will continue to happen. And as we navigate our different spaces, to draw from the experience and the knowledge that has come before us. And so I think it's always a very special connection to be able to acknowledge country as part of our digital health events. Thank you, Emily. I've seen you calling in all the way from Wiradjuri country. So before I introduce you to our pretty amazing panelists, I'd like to get a sense of who else is in the room. So on your screen, you can see a link and a QR code. I am going to, what I should have done was pre-copy that. So I'll copy the link into the chat just so we can get a sense of who else is in the room. And then I'll put up the QR code again in case you prefer to do that over your phone as well. So that's the Menti link. And I will reshare my screen. So the first question is just testing to see the tech is right. Also, I am crowdsourcing the answer, the resolution to a long-standing debate in my household. So there's the link in the chat, the QR code on the screen, and I'm going to now share the Menti slides. All right. Well, thank you to everyone who's contributed. I am pleased to report that both my husband and I are wrong. I was advocating for the triangles, him into the rectangles, which is ridiculous. But it seems that we are both wrong. And so long as he's not right, I can live with that. So our next question, much more relevant to what you're here for today, is where is your home discipline? Are you coming to us from a health background, or are you coming to us from a tech, computer science, engineering background, or something mysterious and otherly? Oh, can the person who's doing something mysterious, or the two people, comment in the chat about where you're coming from? This is all very exciting. And welcome, Gloria, from the chat, joining all the way from New Zealand as well. Coming from overseas in health information, innovation and translation models and project management. Welcome. All right, so it seems like many of us in the room are coming from a health background, but we've got people from representing the tech and also industry, so venture capital. Thank you, Richard, for your comment as well. Okay, and my last getting to know you exercise. How long have you been in the digital health space? So are you thinking, I'm a bit of a newbie, or you've been here for a bit but not quite an old hand, or this is very familiar territory for you? This is much more fun when there's no right answer. I do this in the classroom, and you can see there's always that portion of the students who hold back and they wait for everyone else to respond, and then they click the answer that most people have responded thinking that's the right one. All right, so quite a few of us are relatively new to this digital health space, and a few of us have been here for a little while, and we've got a small number of old hands in the room as well. So I think knowing that there are a lot of people from health and that there are a lot of people who are relatively new to the space, I think will really help drive our conversation today. And particularly around this, how do we translate going from the discipline that we've come from to this new world of digital health, which is inherently interdisciplinary? So with that, I would like to introduce you to our amazing panelists. You will have their information on hand as part of the invitation. They are now also on the screen in static image form, but they are live here with us as well. So we might go in order of our colleagues on the screen. So Ali, I might ask you to kick us off with your introduction, please.
Sure. Thank you, Mel. Hi, good afternoon almost, everybody. Thank you very much for joining. My name is Ali. My background is in medicine. So I was trained as a medical doctor, and I worked for a couple of years as a general practitioner in my home country. And then I moved to Belgium to for my PhD project, which was about non-pharmacological methods to manage pain using experimental models. And then I moved to Australia in 2019 and started my work first as a R&D manager a short period of time, and then as a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Sydney, working on pain management. That was the short background. This is the time that I talk about my translational. Yeah, sure. So what was my journey? So it started, I guess, all during my PhD. The field was experimental evaluation of the pain and the physiology of pain and the physiology of our intervention, which was slow and deep breathing. So I needed to measure some physiological parameters, including heart rate, blood pressure, breathing stuff, with a very high resolution. So we measured everything at the resolution of, for example, 200 sample per second, right? To monitor everything very precisely, and multiple channels in parallel. So I needed to use multiple devices, which were very old, and some of them were not working well, and some high-tech devices for monitoring blood pressure continuously. And so that was my first exposure to a little bit of technology and medical technology or physiological technology devices. And the other thing was that I needed to record the signals and make sense of that. So what I was seeing on the monitor was lots of lines and noises, and which was not that much of meaningful for me. So I needed to process them and take the meaning of everything, and also do some analysis of like cross correlation, how this signal is influencing the other signal and things like that. And then I was faced with a challenge. Should I do this myself, or can I use a software? What software I need to use? What current software are doing? Because a software, a commercial software particularly, is a black box. You don't know what is happening there. And I was not happy with that. So at that time, I talked with my supervisor and said, I can do it myself, I think. And he said, okay, go ahead. And that was the beginning of my experience of getting into programming, MATLAB, signal processing, and all of those things. And it took a lot of time from me to write the codes, understand everything in signal. I mean, not everything I needed to start writing the codes in signal processing and doing analysis. It took me around 6 months collectively, but it was not a question that I answered, and then that was the end of it. It continued the whole duration of my PhD, but it delayed my other projects for around 6 months, I can say. And then that it resulted in some algorithms which I shared with other PhD students, other researchers in other different countries, in Canada, in Germany, in Belgium, and I still work with them, and here in Australia also I share my algorithm. And then I moved to Australia, and I don't know if it was contributed or not, but that exposure to medical technology, I think, break the fear of like digital health for me, having a medical background, and I didn't look at it as a difficult thing to step in. Like, for example, currently I'm working with some software to send text message automatically, and I can do it more easily than before, just going through the programming and algorithm to do that. So it looks doable for me. I think that experience is now helping me as well.
Yeah, that sounds great. That part of your navigating the translation between health and tech to come into this digital health world was learning a new language. So thank you very much for that. Now, Adam, I'll pass over to you for a slightly different journey into digital health.
Yeah, thank you so much. My name's Adam. I'm a postdoc at the University of Sydney's Brain and Mind Centre. So my background is that I am a computer scientist, but really only on paper or by degree, because I've sort of forgotten all the code and all the logic for the most part, all the complexities at this point. Since then, I sort of moved through information systems and human-computer interaction, sort of broadening my horizons, thinking about social issues, ethical issues relating to technology, and specifically health technology. So my interest in sort of design and ethics led me down the journey away from computer science and further towards digital health, which is still a sort of ongoing process. So I guess my research projects in the past were focused on robotics for the most part, artificial intelligence. So my my honors degree was on care robots and the older population, and how ethics and design comes into that area. Then I moved on to social robotics for my PhD, where I tried to figure out different designs and all the ethical and social problems around using social robots in care settings to help address loneliness for specifically the older LGBT population. So a lot of sort of crazy ethical issues, social issues come into that, because we're touching on vulnerable populations, vulnerable situations, and tech solutions, which are also create sort of issues with how meaningful the solutions might be, or how caring they might be. I also worked on sex tech, so sex robotics and the physical disability community, artificial intelligence, and healthcare bias, healthcare and sort of risks of bias in that. Yeah, and eventually I ended up where I am now, which is at Brain and Mind Center. We're working on mobile health now. You'll notice my tech applications are quite eclectic. So now I'm working on mobile health, and we're using that to try to foster positive parent-child interactions and children's social and emotional well-being and development all over the world. And that's a part of the Thrive by 5 initiative. My role here is in the sort of co-design area, where I help facilitate and evaluate all the data we get when talking to the potential end users from all over the world, as well as experts. I provide a sort of tech perspective, looking at the user experience, people's needs, what they like and they dislike about the mobile app that we're evaluating. I'm a bit of a contrarian when it comes to technology. I'm a bit worried, I'm a bit weary about it. I try to think about inclusion and risks of bias and potential for it to be value insensitive if it doesn't take on people's values and things like that. Yeah, I think I'll leave it there. I think I'm happy with that.
Thank you, Adam. And over to you, Alexis.
Thanks so much, Mel. Glad to see you open with the conundrum about cutting sandwiches into triangles and rectangles. I think with a toddler at home, it's an issue I am faced with every single day almost. So I guess about my background. So I did my PhD and master's in clinical psychology at UNSW. So I'm trained as a clinical psychologist. And during my PhD, I actually worked at the Black Dog Institute, where I am now, as an RA, and helped develop Australia's first standalone web and mobile phone intervention for depression. So this intervention, it's now got over 200,000 users. It's been employed in a lot of different healthcare settings. NASA has adapted it for use with astronauts because it's standalone, so you don't need any sort of internet connection or anything like that for it to operate. So I think that was my first exposure to digital health, and you know, it was a really interesting experience trying to take what I had learnt in the clinic, so those conversations and those techniques that you deliver verbally with clients, and try to translate it into an online platform that could be delivered automatically. So I then, once I finished my PhD, moved overseas for a postdoc at Harvard Medical School and worked in neuroimaging. And again, like Ali, this was kind of an environment where I got familiar with signal processing. And I also worked a lot with the concept of reinforcement learning and how it might go awry in people with mood disorders who often struggle with learning from positive events and using those experiences to then look forward to future positive events. So any of you who work in computer science will know that reinforcement learning is the basis of many AI algorithms. So there's some interesting threads that can be drawn there that certainly sparked my interest. At the time, there was also a lot of work being done on using AI to classify MRI images in various ways, so lesion detection. My particular interest was whether we could use AI to detect risk markers for bipolar disorder in people who were presenting for treatment with depression, because it can be difficult to distinguish the conditions. And so once I finished that, I returned to Australia and joined the Black Dog Institute again. where I'm now a senior research fellow, and I work with a team of computer scientists at the DHIN University Applied Artificial Intelligence Institute. And what we're trying to do is leverage the power of AI to try to personalize digital interventions so that they can be delivered in a way that is tailored but also highly scalable. So it's been a really interesting experience working across disciplines. I see it as being a truly cross-disciplinary experience, and certainly fraught with challenges in terms of looking at the differences in outputs that are valued across academic medicine and psychiatry versus academic computer science. So that's been interesting to sort of navigate, but I've also learned a lot about things like commercialization pathways, which are almost the bread and butter of computer science, but in healthcare, it's not often the first thing that we jump to, and certainly not in mental health care. So looking forward to talking more about this as we move forward in the discussion.
Great, thank you, Alexis. And
Thanks.
Grace.
Hello, hi, I'm Grace from Monash University, maybe one of the few people who reside in Melbourne. So I'm the research fellow in human-centered computing and digital health group. So our action lab is a multidisciplinary and impact-focused research group residing Faculty of Information Technology. So I actually have a very canonical education and training record in computer science and software engineering. So I really label myself as a true women in IT example. But talking about my career journey, I have actually very diverse journey. So from my first job like a developer programmer, and then entering to my PhD training in information systems at Monash Uni, which I received about a decade ago. And then I been consulting at Microsoft Research Asia, and then back to Australia, like a lectureship, for Monash Uni, and teaching very technical units, mainly in the postgraduate level programming units. And then I'm moving to the health industry, working as a development manager for Monash Health for a couple of years. So where I just leading quite many technical projects, which is translating like evidence-based medical guidelines into consumer-oriented products, which can be web-based, can be mobile applications. So we won quite a number of awards, from different sources. And now I'm just moving back to academia, working as a senior research engineer and also a research fellow and at Action Lab, because I really want to do more like an impact-focused research and writing up about my experience, and also trying to generalize, the kinds of applications I've done into open source infrastructure that can benefit more people. So like translational researchers from different backgrounds can benefit all those no-code, what I call no-code infrastructure, to create new health, digital health interventions with less IT support. So that's my goal. So as you can see, I kind of label myself as doing a lot of practice-based engineering, software engineering research. So the nature is really, I need to engage heavily in practice of design and implementation of real world systems. I'm talking about the whole life cycle from creation to the real world deployments. So it's very practical. And also without my collaborators from different multidisciplinaries, I couldn't do my research. So it's like I need them and they need me or my team. So we actually delivered lots of what we called non-traditional research outputs, which, as you can see, are not just publications or patents. It can be the real world systems benefiting the real people. Yeah. So we also do a lot of reflection on the co-design process and implementation across the whole domain. yeah, not just limited to the software architecture, the technical perspective, but also how we engage different stakeholders to make the whole process working. Yeah, so I'd love to share my reflections and also the lessons we've learned through the whole journey with the audience. Thanks.
Thank you, Grace. Thank you to all our panelists. Before I move on, I would like to flag, and I'm very sorry, Julie, you told me to do this earlier, but the session is being recorded. So please note that in your interactions today. So I might jump straight into it. A number of, well, all of you mentioned the need for collaboration and working in this interdisciplinary space. And I know from group work generally, not even interdisciplinary, that, you know, sometimes there can be a bit of friction there, and some of the challenges around communicating with people who might not be speaking the same language that you do. So I wondered if you could share with us, I might start with you, Alexis, because you mentioned it, some of the differences you noticed in the tech space and in the health space. Yeah, what were some of the differences that surprised you or that you weren't aware of?
Thanks. So I think some of the immediate differences that we encountered were on collaborative grants. And it was even at the grant writing phase where we say, okay, what is a budget that's required to conduct a research project? And all of us in mental health care are used to doing things on a shoestring, whereas budget in computer science is much more practical and feasible. So the first thing there was really resourcing and scoping and budgets. I think the second thing that was really interesting is what we both viewed as being the end product. So at least in academic psychiatry, mental health, it's often a publication. So the generation of knowledge and maybe the generation of a product that is in that early stage of being evaluated. Whereas in our computer science partners, it was really almost the other end. So something that could be commercialized, patented, disseminated usually in conferences, not necessarily journals. So in prioritizing outputs, we had to both balance things that were important to our respective fields, but also bear in mind that often the outputs that are valued by the funding body are different to what might be valued by, say, a computer science type funder. So yeah, there were some interesting things, and it really came down to having lots of open communication and forums where we could have these discussions and ensure we were both getting value through the collaboration.
Thanks, Alexis. You just touched on the funding, so I thought I might follow up on that before throwing to our other panelists. In this space of this, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary space, what were the kind of funding bodies or opportunities that you were looking at that would consider this digital health area?
Yeah, we look at specialised schemes within the Medical Research Future Fund. There was a scheme that we were successful with that looked at applications of AI to healthcare. The other schemes that we're looking at is NHMRC, schemes like Synergy, which is that synergy of two or more fields together. I know that a lot of people in the space also look at the ARC and philanthropic foundations. But I think that as healthcare workers and health-based academics start to work more closely with computer scientists, we should be looking at unlocking more, commercial type funding to properly fund this research, rather than doing things on a shoestring through government grants as we're used to. I think that's probably what's needed to achieve that larger scale real world impact that is possible with these technologies.
Yeah, great, thank you. And Grace, you were talking about real world impact and translational work as well. I wondered whether you could comment on what were some of your observations of the similarities and differences between the different disciplines that you work with.
Well, yeah, I think the key thing, I can highlight two main reflections. One is I think it's a mutual learning process for us because we share the communication, would always be the challenging thing as we use different vocabulary. We kind of at the beginning when you establish a team, you're not just introducing your expertise, where you're from, what kind of expertise you are bringing to the project. It's also about how you understand each other. We have different methodologies and even have different research questions to explore. We share the same project context, but I would say the questions you care about, you're interested, will be different. Yeah, we share the same question, problem, challenges, and the same solution, but you write about this from different angle. And because we're looking at these through different lens and using different methods that you're familiar with, you have different interpretations as well. So I think this is truly the mutual learning journey for all our stakeholders. And we need to be open, to listen to each other, especially I think when you have a computer scientist talking to, a medical practitioner, it can be a disaster. Because our culture in computer science is really flat, but it can be very hierarchical in the medical system, and that where the authority is. So it's really difficult to have the medical doctor listening to the designers, what the consumers really want, thinking about from the bottom up, approach, etc. So this is my first highlight. The second thing is really how we work as the collaborators. Yeah, so we acknowledge that this is a partnership. We have different stakeholders equally, representing your fields, your knowledge and expertise. However, when you actually working with each other, in quite many cases, the IT people can be used like a vendor. So it's very naturally in a research project like the MRFF, your medical collaborator can give you lots of instructions. Say, I need this. I want you to make things working in this way. However, this, the design things, the architecture, the selection of the technological stack is not their expertise. So we spend a lot of time explaining, why things will not work that way. Yeah, in a very polite way. So we are not IT support. We are not vendors. We are the collaborator. Equally, you share the problem in this partnership. So I think in practical way, it's not always working like that. Yeah, so we have to admit. So this is where lots of arguments can happen. And it's not always going really well. So I think this is something we have to admit and have to face, have to learn how to work as a true in a true partnership.
Yeah, and I think that's such an important observation. I think that the tendency to say digital health is important, we're all going to get on board, we all partner with each other. But the reality is there's, as with any new partnership, there's going to be a bit of, a few clashes as we try and work out how to work with the other person. I wonder
trust,
absolutely.
It's really the establishment of the trust. Yeah.
Yes. And so I'm going to throw to our MD in the room for a right of reply. So Ali, I was wondering if you had any observations about how our own disciplinary structures, for instance, or the culture within the health discipline compared to IT tech background colleagues, how that culture influences the interactions that we have with each other.
Yeah, well, I don't have the experience of that interaction, like a direct experience working with IT on a partnership project. However, I think these challenges are not unique to this area. I'm now working with a team of surgeons. My background is in chronic medical condition. My research surgeons want a quick fix. So I have a challenge explaining to them, okay, this is the way it works. It's not a one-day job. We have to review literature, things like this. So when you move, even within one discipline, when you move across subspecialties, you will have those challenges as well. So it's not really unique to multidisciplinary work. Within one disciplinary, you also will face these challenges. And I think, as other colleagues mentioned, you need to define the partnership principles. Like, for example, sometimes it is truly shared leadership, right? So you specify that this project principle is shared leadership. Sometimes it is not meant to be shared leadership, right? So you need to adjust your expectation based on the principles and based on the how that specific project is working. Sometimes, collaboration is based on having the shared leadership and shared idea, and everybody is going to have equal contribution and interest. Sometimes it's not. So you need to adjust your expectation and clearly mention that at the beginning of the project, so that makes expectation adjusted, and then hopefully people collaborate together. But also, yeah, it's a challenge not having the same language or common knowledge, but it's approachable by providing that shared language and knowledge at the beginning, or if everybody share their perspective, and also some definitions and operational definitions of the project, so it brings people together.
Yeah, and I really wrote down your phrase to define the partnership principles, and I think being upfront about how we see each other's roles is part of preventing some of the clashes later on. So, you know, if the expectation is that you're bringing somebody on in a vendor type capacity, then being clear to them about that, and then they can choose whether that's how they want to engage or not, rather than partway through signing up to something that you think is a true partnership and co-leadership, and finding out that that's not the case, and then having to renegotiate those boundaries. So you were talking, Ali, also about vocabulary and having a shared language, and I wondered if I could throw to Adam about this. So Adam, you have said openly and upfront that you are a computer scientist, kind of on paper only, and then you've navigated into this space that is a little bit health, but I dare say a little bit of philosophy as well. And I wondered if you could share a little bit about how you went from this very specific technical training to a more kind of social sciences approach to health.
Yeah, sure. I would like to just quickly sort of repeat that, yes, an unshared language is a challenge that we'll come up against. So for instance, just the term digital health would not be something that I would have used previously. I would have said health technology, health information systems, something like that. The way I've navigated through it is to try and hold on to certain themes throughout all my work, and create a shared language through that other people might be able to understand from different perspectives. So I focus on equity and diversity, values, things like that, and try to speak in that way so that people might be able to understand it from both the health perspective and the computer science perspective. Another thing that's helpful is to sort of track your methods, keep the same methods through different research you're doing. So I focus on co-design, value-sensitive design. That's the way I've navigated it so far.
And Adam, you mentioned earlier about ongoing biases. And I think sometimes when we think about the possibility of digital technologies as maybe overcoming some of our flaws as humans, I wonder if we perhaps are being overly optimistic. So I am keen to hear your thoughts on how some of the considerations of equity, for instance, some of the biases that are inherent in the way that we deliver healthcare or think about technology or even gender in the workplace, how some of that plays out in your work and your observations of that in digital health.
Sure, yeah. So bias is something I am worried about, yes. There is a possibility for technology, especially health technology, to either perpetuate or challenge our societal biases. For instance, clinical decision support systems might perpetuate biases, sort of healthcare disparities experienced by gender diverse people if these systems don't have data on gender diverse people, such as transgender persons, intersex persons. And so not only is that going to cause an issue with just bias inherently if these systems don't account for those people, but it could be a safety issue. For instance, if a system is making a recommendation on prescription for someone who's experiencing hormonal imbalance and it doesn't understand, and it hasn't been communicated to the health professional either, in that case, that person is gender diverse. And so that's a safety issue. This space also allows us to challenge bias in order to create inclusion and have representation or diversity through including different voices, creating more sort of heterogeneous teams, things like that. Yep.
Thanks, Adam. And I might throw this to everyone, and you can decide how you'd like to jump in. But in the spirit of being lost in translation, what is something that you wish your colleagues from disciplines other than your own knew about your work? What would somebody else? Yeah, what's something that somebody else would know that would make the collaboration easier for you? While you think, I invite members of the audience, if you've got questions, to pop them into the chat as well.
Mel, I might jump in here with, it's just, it's an observation and it's a point that when we're having meetings with our collaborators, we enjoy discussing. But I guess from the perspective of computer science, particularly algorithm development and AI, often the end goal is to make something, I guess, more accurate, more efficient, more effective. But there's this kind of conundrum in healthcare where that is not necessarily, from a patient's perspective, what they value most out of healthcare. So it's just an interesting point that I think when we're working at the intersection of healthcare and informatics, should be thinking about. So, you know, we can think, oh, if your child was to get a rash, where do you first go? You go to the internet. But if you ask someone, if you need to have brain surgery tomorrow, would you prefer a team of highly skilled neurosurgeons or a surgical robot? That's less clear-cut. And asking why we have those preferences is really helpful for kind of uncovering some of the often conflicting, contradictory values we have around what constitutes care and healthcare and what we expect from it. So I think as we move forward in digital health, having that sort of conversation is just, it's wonderful for ensuring like a really interesting collaboration. And it's been great hearing both sides of that from both computer science and healthcare.
Yeah, and sustainable as well, something that will live beyond us because it's relevant and of use to the people who are using it. Ali.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point. what I experienced in the field of digital health, and I wish I experienced this more sooner before, was the principle of co-design and consumer-led research. I think that's something that can bring people together and make a common outcome and common goal, and as a principle. Like, for example, in our project, we got the funding to design a mobile app because we thought, oh, that looks cool, that's good, everyone, anything you want, there's an app for it, so let's do it. But then when we talk with patients, we realize that that's not necessarily what they want. They prefer, well, our patient population, I cannot generalize it to every population, but they preferred something more simple, more accessible, less cognitively demanding, less confusing, more user-friendly, and then they chose text messaging, simple. And then we see the results. We see that their engagement is good compared to mobile app in the specific context. So I think if we wanted to just do based on our interest, then it was kind of biased toward our interests and experiences, which is not, as Alexis said, it's not necessarily what patients value and what patients want. So every aspect, like the outcome, the design, the product, and everything, I think we need to engage with all stakeholders, consumers, clinicians, service managers, policy people, and then yeah, look at what is need, and then what is their perspective. And of course, consumer-led research has different levels, right? Like a level that consumers lead their research, and a level which is the least level of contribution. It's just you check with them if they like it or not. So we can go across this continuum, but I think that's something that can bring people together. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you, Ali. I am certainly that patient that you are describing, wanting something simple, easy to use, not cognitively demanding. Grace.
Yeah, I just want to add one example. It's so typical because so many projects, digital health projects led by the medical practitioners and researchers, and they can arbitrarily say, I want this. You know, I think, you know, like one of the projects like in women health, like, okay, we want to promote preconception health concept, and we want to deliver a chatbot intervention. And however, and it's very arbitrary because following the co-design approach, we want to define the problem, the needs, but you know, not just jumping into the solution directly, because you know, the ChatGPT kind of comes up and everyone wants some innovation, you know, using that. But actually, what is the real problem? So from our qualitative workshop with women, so it's not about they cannot finding the information. It's still a very wicked problem about engagement. And we still need to find the use case, why, you know, why they look for the information. You know, what's the true problem behind why people, you know, not wanting to have a baby, or, you know, concerned about the fertility, etc. So we find, you know, it's more than the health problem. It's more than health and well-being. It can be including lots of social issues like the relationship, you know, the work condition, the finance, you know, lots of things behind that. So how you know, tackling these problems and providing the new services. So still lots of things needs to be answered through some you know, very robust methods, and then you dig into the design, and then you ideate the digital solutions.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. And I think that's the common thread, isn't it? That we've really got to understand the problem and the people that are experiencing it and what their experiences are in order to come up with a workable, sustainable solution rather than going straight to the solution.
Yeah.
So we have,
will be truly used by consumers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Not
You're
like
not
me,
making
download
the use
all the
case.
apps and leave them there. Yes. So we have a question in the chat. Thank you for the feedback, Natasha. So Adam, your work sounds absolutely amazing. Would love to hear of your experiences of turning end users' insights into end user requirements and then software requirements. Over to you, Adam.
Yeah, thank you for that. I had read your question in the chat there. I immediately thought of a project I did. So there's no great conclusion to this story, but you can take from it what you will. We did a project where we were working with a aged care home, and we're trying to introduce a social robot so that the older persons could interact with it, have some fun, have chats, things like that. And the main issue that came up was privacy. So the social robot was using a camera and recording devices to be able to recognize people when they came back. So it would interact with someone, remember that person, and then interact with them again. And so that was something that was desirable, but it came up against, so the sort of personalization was desirable, but it came up against privacy. And so we went back to the drawing board to try and figure out a way to do it. We effectively sort of blinded the system, made it grayer so that it would not necessarily remember the individual person, but still try to, by look, but try to remember people by their voice and things like that. So we thought that was a little bit more privacy sensitive. And this was a humbling moment for me in that they, again, did not want that. So effectively, we took all of that out, introduced it back in, still a problem. And the problem was not that the software was all gone in that sense, but the camera was still on the robot. And so it was the artifact, it was a tiny little product on front of the robot that was still a remaining problem. And I thought that was very humbling experience for me, yes. That was how I translated end user requirements or insights into new design. Yeah.
Thanks, Adam. Natasha, did that answer your question? Do you have any follow-up?
Oh, it was absolutely amazing. Thanks for sharing that experience. I find that tricky in my work as well because there's a lot of competing interests, and sometimes the issues, depending on where you're implementing within the healthcare system, haven't been resolved, the systemic issues, which make implementation really tricky because there are multiple stakeholders there. So in my work, I dealt with end users within the healthcare system as well as consumers, and there were just a lot of competing interests there. And sometimes feasibility was also a question that arose, especially with software requirements. Like, in an ideal world, I want everything to be integrated, my data from here, 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 here. And then it's like, well, in the healthcare system at the moment, that's a bit tricky. So it was just amazing to hear that experience and then how you went about iterating to kind of address that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Natasha, for your comment as well. And I might throw that as a kind of final reflection point for our other panelists. So thinking particularly about the health systems, or actually maybe even the limitations of technology, because we alluded to that earlier, how has some of those constraints and realities influenced your approach to digital health? Grace, I can see you pondering and thinking.
Yeah, because I've done a lot of things and developing the conversational based, conveying the interventions. So a very typical thing is, a couple of months ago with the emergence of the very matured and conversational AI powered ChatGPT, our previous technologies became very like an inferior solution, I would say, because medical people want full control over the responses and of the what the chatbot responded to the consumers. So they trust only the rule-based chatbots. So which is you predefine what the requests are, and you crafted the carefully crafted evidence-based responses. So they want this the full control from our medical collaborators. And now we know the constraints of the technology it's safe, to not making any mistakes, not saying anything wrong, but it cannot handle all the questions from the user. So which makes it looks very dumb, and not very usable. So it's good enough for research, yeah, but as what I mentioned earlier about the real use case, you want people to use it, and then we will be motivated to keep improving it. So when ChatGPT released, before that point, we kind of in this world, we thought this is good enough. Okay, it's satisfying all the stakeholders, but now we have better technology, so we need to shift, to a new world, developing something new, which is knowledge based, and based on the generative AI. So that is, we need to be more brave and open, to allow the large language models to generate responses. And you still can have the control over those, because we have the new technologies now enabling us to do this. So that's we'll introduce more conversations and more or educational conversations with my medical collaborators, just to convince them that it's a new pathway, and we can build something newer and safer, and powerful.
Wow, what an incredible message to land on 2 minutes before we're due to finish. So I thank you very much to all of our attendees, to the Digital Health ECR Committee, and especially to our panelists. I would happily spend the rest of my afternoon having a cuppa with you, just learning more about your stories and your experiences and your achievements. I think, Grace, something you neglected to mention in your introduction was that you last year were awarded highly commended in the Women Leading Tech Award, which is a national award. So as you can see, we have some pretty amazing talent and some very special people on the panel today. I think what I got out of today's session was a huge sense of humility, that effective collaboration takes open communication, a lot of listening, and, as you said, Grace, being brave, being open to the possibility. I think what I also heard from each of our panelists was, as part of that sense of humility, needing to be open to asking questions about the problem. What is the real problem? Why are people engaging or not engaging in this way? What is important to them? And through that listening, we have a better sense of what the issues are and what the most appropriate solutions are. So you've given me lots and lots of food for thought. I hope that all our attendees have felt the same way. Please join me in thanking our panelists. And before you all rush off, we have a short, teeny tiny questionnaire to get some feedback on today's webinar, to help make it better for next time and to understand what you need. So again, please take a few minutes to do this and join me in thanking our wonderful, wonderful panelists. It's really strange when you can't hear the applause. So Ashley's also put a link in the chat to the survey as well. So thank you, everyone. I look forward to seeing your responses and bumping into you around the place, even in Melbourne, Grace.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having us.